Hi, my name is Katie Hodges, and welcome to my podcast. I think that emotions play a huge role in our lives. At least they've always played a huge role in mine. How we interpret our emotions usually has a lot to do with the quality of our life. And whenever I'm in a highly emotional state or I'm constantly reacting and my emotions are always controlling me, my quality of life is dramatically and drastically worse. But emotions are so hard to recognize before they happen or before they take control over you. And so often I find that by the time I realize I'm being emotional, I'm already so far down the rabbit hole of reaction that I just am stuck in this terrible place of trying to fight it when you're already in it. So, what I'm really working on right now is trying to recognize an emotion as it springs up and what's actually happening, and then to distrust those emotions. I got this concept from Tom Bilyeu, and he says it all the time: distrust your emotions. I've said it a couple other times on this podcast, and when I first heard that, it absolutely struck me before I really even understood it. Distrust your emotions. Feelings aren't facts. What I feel isn't real. What I feel isn't real. These are just signals for me to interpret. How I interpret these emotions can help change my reactions, can help change how I feel about whatever the emotion is, can help change my interpretation of the emotion itself. So, where do emotions come from? Emotions are a collaboration between our body's signals and the story our mind is telling us about those sensations. So, emotions are just signals. Now, I've been doing a lot of reading on where exactly they come from, whether it's the body first and then it affects the mind, or if it's the mind and the body. And so far, what I found is that there isn't a definitive answer. Some research suggests one, some research suggests the other. And to me, I don't need to know the exact root. What I need to know is how I can interpret what's happening as it happens. What I need to learn is to stop and take a moment to recognize that it is an emotion instead of being controlled by it. The problem is that emotions feel so real. Emotions feel like facts. Emotions feel so strong in us, and we don't recognize that we have any control over them, especially when something traumatizing or hurtful happens. The emotion springs up inside of you without your permission. Emotions are never going to go away, for me at least. So, what I want to figure out is, how do I navigate them? Because so many times we've all learned to navigate our emotions in negative ways. We've all learned negative coping mechanisms or negative ways to react from, whether it's our family or our friends or people around us. And I don't want to navigate my emotions using negative coping mechanisms anymore. I don't want to create more harm for myself with my reactions, whether it's hurting myself or hurting somebody close to me or making quick decisions that then have lasting consequences. I don't want to live like that anymore. And I think that most people don't. The problem is it's so hard to see that this is our responsibility, because it is. It's no one else's responsibility but our own. Having accountability for yourself and your reactions and your emotions is one of the hardest things I think a person can learn, because it's so easy to be a victim, especially if your excuses or what happened to you is true and real. It's so easy to say, well, I reacted like this because this person did this to me. And while that's true, it doesn't serve a positive version of yourself, because what you're doing is giving away your power to that person or circumstance. And this robs us of our ability to take responsibility and to change. So if emotions are just a signal, all we have to do to navigate them better is to recognize the signal. So when I start to feel emotional, instead of playing that story in my head and looping it back and back of how I was hurt or whatever's making me anxious or stress that's working me up and starting to make me feel really overwhelmed, instead, I want to stop and recognize that this is just a signal. And then I want to ask myself, is it true? Is the story I'm telling myself, is what I'm feeling even true? Or is it fear? Or is it trauma? Or is it past experiences that are then my mind and body are using to interpret this present experience? And I find that if I take that moment, most of the time, I can recognize that I'm just being emotional. In Enola Holmes, Sherlock says, "You're being emotional. It's understandable, but unnecessary." I probably replay that quote to myself every day in my head, because it's understandable that we feel a certain way when something happens. It's understandable to be emotional at times in your life, but most of the time, it doesn't serve us. It's unnecessary, and it usually makes us less productive or clouds our mind so we can't think as clearly. So I choose to stop and ask myself, what is this story that I'm telling myself? You have to pattern interrupt just falling into that emotion and letting it control you or control your actions. And that's one of the hardest things to do, because emotions can be so overwhelming. And if you live your entire life not recognizing that it's a choice, starting to learn to make that choice feels impossible. And it's taken me a whole year from the moment I realized this to actually be able to make choices for the first time instead of my emotions spilling out of me. And it feels really freeing. And it gives me this light at the end of the tunnel feeling like, okay, all this work I'm doing is worth it. Because it's not easy. And it has to be done every single day in every single situation. Each situation that you're placed in, each circumstance, each interaction with somebody is an opportunity to practice this. It's an opportunity to practice distrusting your emotions. It's an opportunity to practice recognizing these signals and what they're telling you, and an opportunity to practice how you react to that, if at all. Alex Hormozy says the best way to solve a problem sometimes is to just decide that it's not a problem. What if I just decided, if I got my feelings hurt, that didn't bother me, or that it wasn't important, and to stop that emotional cycle as soon as it starts? Because the alternative for me is to just mentally fuck myself and go in circles thinking about all the factors of whatever happened, or thinking about all my interactions with somebody, or thinking about all the things I'd done in the past. And it just gets me nowhere. And it always ends up leading to a really high anxiety state for me, which, if I'm not careful and I keep looping that, ends up taking away hours or days or weeks or months or years of my life. And I'm sick of giving my time away to something that I now know I can control. I think emotions can be healthy. To me, obviously, I think emotions can be healthy. I believe that they're just an evolutionary tool, like so many of the other things I'm battling against in myself right now, and that they do serve a purpose. And who doesn't love to feel joy? Who doesn't love to feel loved? Who doesn't love to feel excited? So taking away those would make our lives feel pretty meaningless, in my opinion. Which means that there's always two sides to a coin. There's always a push and a pull. So if we value positive emotions, that means we're going to have to deal with negative ones. So how do we navigate this? For me, like I said, it's the first step is just recognizing that you're having an emotion, instead of recognizing it after you've had a big reaction. It seems repetitive and simple, but it's one of the hardest things possible to do, to stop yourself in the middle of an emotion before a reaction. But it's also one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life. The tiny moments I've experienced over the last few months of actually practicing that were some of the most fulfilling moments I've ever felt. More fulfilling than graduating school, you know? And it's because it is so hard, and because it works so well. If this didn't work, I wouldn't still be doing it. You know, after a year of putting in hours and hours and hours, probably hundreds of hours of learning and practicing, I feel different. But I'm not different enough yet. I haven't changed enough yet. I haven't put in enough work, because I do still have hard days. And I think even when I get to a place where I will be really proud of myself, I'm still going to have hard days. Hard days will never stop coming. Hard days will never stop being there. But I now have a choice of how I want to interpret the world. So my goal this year, one of many, is how to stop being controlled by what I feel. How to stop letting my emotions control me and control my reactions. Living in your reactions all the time and being controlled by them is exhausting. And it makes me highly unproductive. And my quality of life is dismal. So how do we stop this? We need to regulate our emotions and our reactions. The goal of emotional regulation is to be able to respond to our The goal of emotional regulation is to be able to respond to our emotions in a healthy and productive manner. So what does that mean? A healthy and productive manner. And how do we do that? To me, what I've found so far is a couple ways. Values. So I talked about values a lot, and some of the ones I use for this are poise and calm and grace. I want to be somebody who embodies those values. Somebody who embodies grace doesn't fly off the handle when something happens. Somebody who embodies calm doesn't get worked up in any circumstance. Somebody who embodies poise doesn't let themselves and their character be torn down by external forces. So figuring out your values is going to give you an anchor in these situations, because you need something to lean back on. You need something to judge yourself against. How do you know if you're making progress or how you would want to act or react in a situation if you don't have any sort of mirror to hold to yourself? So I use values for almost everything, whether it's goals or mindset. But when it comes to emotions and reactions, I think they're pretty essential. You have to have a blueprint of who you want to be. You have to have a blueprint of the kind of person you want to embody. So I talk all the time about envisioning your future self. Who is that person? What do they look like? What are their values? And then you have to look at the differences between who you are today and who that person is and who you want to be. And the more that you solidify that vision, the clearer it becomes, the easier it is and the easier it will be to act in accordance with those values. The other part is the story you tell yourself about who you are and who you want to be. The story you tell yourself about those emotions. The story you tell yourself and your interpretation of what actually happened. So often it's too easy to get hurt, you know? I'm a very sensitive person. I get hurt very easily. And it's so easy to fall into a victim mindset. But it's one of the most unproductive things you could possibly do. And often it leads to me being stuck, which I've talked about before. Feeling really stuck because I gave my power away to a moment. I don't want to let a moment control the rest of my life. I don't want to let a moment control the rest of my day or my month or my year. It's just a moment. It's just a feeling. It's not a fact. So how do we change that story? For me, it's mostly done by reading about how other people change their stories, reading about how other people have gone through all of these things and the tools that they used. I love learning from others because it jumpstarts the learning by experience that I have to do for myself, which saves me a ton of time. If we had to learn every single thing ever for ourselves without any mentorship or help or knowledge of others, we would be so stagnant. Knowledge stacks. So a big way I choose to learn this is by learning from other people, other researchers who have spent their whole lives testing theories, other people in my life who have gone through similar circumstances. This makes it a lot easier for me because I also feel related to. I don't feel so alone. The other way is I change the story that I tell myself when I'm by myself. I do this through proof of my actions. And before I really had any proof, I did it that I just had faith that I could change. I had faith that I could be the person I wanted to be. I started to really look into those values. I started to make lists and cut them down and find out what were my core values. What were the core values of the person I wanted to be? And how lacking was I in embodying those? And as I got opportunities to change, I tried to act in accordance with those values and in accordance with how the person I want to be would act. And that started to give me proof over time. So now, when I get into a really hard situation and I start to feel emotions coming up, or maybe they've already boiled up, but I just haven't reacted yet, I get to lean on that experience. I lean on it and I think about it and I tell myself over and over in my head, This is just an emotion. You've been through this before. You know what to do now. And it sounds silly, but it's really working for me. And interrupting that pattern has been one of the hardest things to change about myself, other than getting out of bed every day. That was pretty hard. But I did both those things by believing that I could before I had any proof to show myself that I could or that I was worth it. I think that self-worth plays a big part in our emotions. I think the better your self-worth is, the more proof you have that you are who you say you are, the easier it is to distrust your emotions. So start building that proof. Take action. Set goals. Because the better you feel about yourself, the harder it will be for some person or some circumstance to break you down. Because you have proof that it's just not true, that whatever that person is making you feel isn't true, because you know who you are, because you've put the work in. The Stoics say you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react. That is our responsibility. How we interpret the world, how we interpret what happens to us is our responsibility and our responsibility alone. Even if somebody really did hurt us or betray us or physically harm us, how we choose to react to this, how we choose to interpret that, and how we choose to carry it in ourselves and carry that story and that memory is going to affect us for the rest of our lives. I don't want to be somebody who just reacts. So I tell myself, what you feel isn't real. What you feel isn't real. Distrust your emotions. And it sounds like I'm discounting myself, but the truth is that emotions take away from what's actually happening. So if I can take them off the board, I can see so much more of a situation for what it really is. And I can take each situation as an opportunity to practice what I would want my future self to do. But when you're in the emotions, you can't see opportunity because all you can do is feel. And each time I do this, I notice a change. And I feel physically better. I feel mentally better. I feel lighter. I don't feel just happy or satisfied or proud. I feel like a weight has been lifted off of me. I feel more whole. But it's so hard to do it every time. And it can be so disappointing when you don't always react the way that you want to do, or that you don't wake up every single day feeling grateful and happy after you've put all this work in and you've gone through so much. So I have to remind myself that I am making progress. And I need to constantly remind myself that I am making progress. Alex Hormozy says, we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And that's why I also need to constantly consume knowledge and content. That's why I need to listen to podcasts almost every day. That's why I need to read every day. That's why I need to write every day. That's why I need to film this. Because all these things that I learn will fall to the wayside and I will forget them. All these habits that I'm making will deteriorate if I don't continuously practice them. I need to remind myself all the time. I remind myself every second of every day of everything that I'm learning for the last year. And I know I'm going to have to continue to do that for the rest of my life. But I have to remind myself that I am making progress. Because after a year, it's still hard. And I still don't feel all better yet. And I didn't expect to. But when you have been in something for so long, you start to wonder, when will the progress happen? And what you have to stop and realize is that progress has already been made. I am making progress. And you need to be grateful for the progress you have made. You need to recognize it. You need to celebrate that. because otherwise you will just keep comparing yourself to not being good enough. And not being good enough yet is okay if you have goals, but just saying that you're not good enough isn't productive. So I need to look at all the micro progress I've made. Look at all the small situations. Look at all the text messages that I didn't freak out about and instead ask somebody what they meant. All those little micro examples to show myself the proof that I am making progress. Because it's so hard when your life hasn't changed that much, but you've put so many hours, thousands of hours into something, to want to stick with it. But don't leave before the miracle. And I just have to remind myself of that. Happy New Year, everybody. Like and subscribe if there's anything of value here. And until next time, I'm Katie Hodges, and thanks for listening.